The cabin, Gwyn's Gambit. That was the name my father gave to this cabin we were going to build. From my perspective, it began as yet another forced march. But the gambit was that he could pull his children away from the enchanting and ever-present temptations of Chi-Town, our big city. We are going to spend the summer in northern Wisconsin building a summer house. What? Cripes, you cannot mean this. Unbelievable. You didn't ask me. Really? Really? Is this because of that little incident with the police in Macomb? Oh, my sister and I were totally bummed out, depressed. My parental units had purchased some land on the Green Bay shore in the Door County vacation area. This was another place my mother had read about in one of her magazines. In Cape Cod of the Midwest. And all. We left our friends behind and packed into 2 cars with the next in a series of German shepherds in tow. What happened to all the cats that summer? I suddenly wonder. We were all to live together in a tiny 2-bedroom rental house. It was a mile from the building site. The first day on the construction job, it was 400 degrees outside. Likely entire forest melted, and Northwood's records were set in a 1,000-mile radius. Likely. A crawl space had been dug for the cabin foundation and a large pile of cement blocks delivered to the wrong side of the lot. Was that intentional? Our first work was to move the 30-pound cement blocks from the delivery site, about 100 feet, to the dig. No gloves. My easy-going, blushing pink hands were raw and red by midday, block after block, sweat running into my eyes, hair disheveled, and we know how important that hair was. We didn't buy into this working under protest. I'm just saying. No one cared about the protest. As the days went on, patterns were formed. My sister and I were directed to stay at the rental house and wash the breakfast dishes each morning. From there, we had to walk the mile along the 2-lane cedar and white birch line roadway to the cabin site. The rest of the family, including the dog, would have driven on ahead to plan for and begin the day's building projects. We were each outfitted with carpenter's aprons. Does this stiff ecru apron make me look fat? A retired carpenter came to help with the building since none of us, including my dad, really knew what we were doing. My dad pretended he did and drew up the cabin plans because several members of the family were contractors, including his father. Later, we were to learn that the roof structure wasn't strong enough to hold the potential weight of Wisconsin snows. And we had to remove parts of the ceiling and add strengthening collar beams, connecting rafters with a roof truss. I learned the lingo. Mr. Simonar, retired local carpenter, retired because of his missing fingers. He watched our skill level in those early days and smiled. "This is a nail," he gently explained. "This is how you hold a hammer. Lift this wall together as a family and place it on the flooring base." I had visions of wallpapering my room as a family and carried real hopes of learning more swear words from my father. "Work as a team and put this window in place. Some call it insulation board. In this family, you call it gingerbread. Okay. Long as we all understand your voice, Mr. Simon R. offered. And the pink stuff. Insulation, not cotton candy. We complained majorly about the cotton candy sticking to our sweaty arms when we were insulating the attic. Without mask, I might mention. Although I'm not sure that dust mask had been invented yet back when the earth was still cooling. Reuben? Mr. Simon R. to my father. One thing about this particular house, it will never blow away in the wind. With all the bent nails your children have pounded in, the additional weight, don't you know? Do you know what kind of noise a nail makes when it goes zinging into the woods? Quite musical. We amused Mr. Simon R. Mr. Simon R. amused and engaged us. We had never met anyone like him. Mutual amusement and increasing admiration as the summer progressed. But slowly, a transformation began to occur in me. Hot damn! I didn't see this coming. I began to love the crisp scent of the cedar trees on midsummer mornings. There was the Queen Anne's lace slightly swaying in the breezes, surrounded by periwinkle blue chicory. Wild strawberries grew in the ditches. I tasted some. I saw deer peering out of the early fog. I got strong, both from the work and from the morning walks. My sister and I talked and became even closer, if that was possible. The changed pace gave me moments to think. I had to suspend smoking and drinking alcohol because I was living in a tiny space with my parents. Evenings, we played poker as a group, using tops, yes, diet right and more, in place of poker chips. No TV in the little house, just Mom's reel-to-reel player and their 1940s music. Somehow, deep inside of me, this was what I had unknowingly wanted all along. Connection, caring, attention, love, peace. It gave a whole new meaning to the summer of love. But slowly, familiar patterns returned uninvited. My mother said of the delivery boys who began to show up daily at the building site, "They just won't leave you alone." The house building supplies were delivered regularly by truck, especially extra boxes of nails. The local boys began to vie to see who could drive the lumberyard truck for the Gwyn cabin deliveries. It was fun. They would flirt, and with my new muscles and my sun-streaked blonde curls, I was pretty irresistible, I will admit. The dating began. Again, I remember one of the nights my date brought me home a few minutes late. That was, of course, a major violation. When my dad met me at the door, my date made the tragic error of mouthing off to my dad. "Hey, Doc, it's kind of close to your bewitching hour." This was said with the tip of the head and a wink that was supposed to charm my good old boy Daddy. Daddy was many things, but a good old boy wasn't one of them, especially where his daughters were concerned. No one did that. I cringed at the thought. No one sassed my father. We knew better. My dad hauled back and literally punched the guy in the face, knocking him down in the dirt on his back. That was the end of that guy forever, and the end of dating for a while. The 3-bedroom cabin we built as a family that summer and continued to work on in subsequent years became our gathering place. And although I eventually lived hundreds of miles away, there was an annual trek, ultimately with my kids, to seek to recreate the magic of family togetherness built among the Door County trees. The gambit paid off in significant ways. I was far from tamed, but I knew a new layer of joy that paid off later in life, happily.